You're listening to the Future Tech Health Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Until I reached age 40, I never realized the obvious, that we all have medical issues, or we at least have a family member or close relation that has, or will have them in the future. Medicine and biological systems are the final frontier. Until we've conquered death, figured out how life began, cured cancer, and understood our purpose in the universe, there's a heck of a lot to talk about when it comes to our health. Future Tech Health means I'll be covering futuristic topics that are actually already in clinical trials, or even starting to appear on shelves or by prescription, or available for your own use. We dive deep into stem cells, CRISPR-Cas9, the science of sleep, epigenetics, medical testing, cancer, ketogenic diets, stem cells, aging, regenerative medicine, and more. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a serious medical problem. Remember, however, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you enjoy the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and share it with friends. Thank you. Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech and Future Tech Health podcast. And I have Greg Kieser, founder of an investment firm, Supersystemicly. It's a New York City-based think tank and angel investment firm. He's also the author of Dear Machine, a letter to a super-aware, intelligent machine. So this will be super interesting. Greg, thanks for coming. How you doing?
Great, Richard. Thanks so much for having me on the line.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can start with the book first. What is Dear Machine about?
So Dear Machine is a letter to a future super intelligent entity. So it's an exploration of not just artificial intelligence and where it's going, but where kind of innovation is going in general, the general direction it's going. And so it's a thought experiment about what would a super intelligence do if it landed upon Earth right now and started to look at our problems and tried to help us solve those problems.
Is that your premise, that it would be helpful to us and not wanting to enslave us, or would it just ignore us? I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, that's the hypothesis I put out there. I mean, I believe that superintelligence will emerge through all of the systems that we're currently building, everything from our transportation networks to our shopping websites, to Google Maps, to everything Facebook is doing and learning about our wants and needs and desires, and eventually those will merge together with the use of blockchains and some other things, and superintelligence will emerge in that direction rather than the other way, which some people expect, like in a boxed environment at the hands of a corporation or government or something. And since I expect it to emerge in that direction, which is a hypothesis, something I'm not absolutely 100% certain about, it's kind of a belief based on what I've learned. But since I expect it to merge in that direction, I expect it to have our goals, essentially, thousands of goals of ours, and on the whole, those would be good for humanity.
How do you think our current technologies are going to have this emergent property of superintelligence? Like, mechanistically, how do you think that could happen?
Well, I think blockchains are. I think blockchains are going to be key. You're starting to see startups in the blockchain space who are trying to connect, essentially create smart contracts for the use of processing power, memory, drive space, etc. Because this is a very real need in the world, and without that, it's very difficult to share those kinds of resources. Developing all the contracts with entities or algorithms, etc., that really don't have an established relationship. So my expectation is that blockchain development will continue to happen, and it will outpace, say, the building of AI inside of boxed environments.
Yeah, right now it seems like AI is a very, very narrow, like idiot savants. And I've seen maybe a few systems where they piece together, multiple idiot savants to make a system that's capable of, several different types of high-level interaction, but there still doesn't seem to be any spark there, any emergent ability to have like a generalized artificial intelligence that can handle all kinds of situations.
Yeah, for sure. And if you think about how intelligence evolved in humans, it was a complex it was a complex set of goals, hundreds, thousands of goals inside of our bodies and minds and so forth, interacting with a very complex environment. And I don't see how in the boxed environment they'll be able to give a complex environment to these burgeoning entities in a way that will allow them to develop faster than the kind of the open source, open access to the internet thing, where they have access to all of this data and they're and able to learn from this kind of the complex world that we live in.
I see what you mean. Makes sense. And then in regards to your think tank, what's the premise of the company there, and what do you guys work on?
Yeah, so the thing that I honed in on, and this is kind of my background, is in biology, genetics, what I studied in undergrad, and then I kind of worked in technology. But I got into complex systems too at university, and I've continued to study those. And the overarching theme for what the angel investment firm, or the investment thesis for the firm, is to essentially invest in things that increase diversity and complexity. And the reason why I have hypothesized is because over the course of history, humans have done all this work to, building all these systems, agriculture, health, educational systems, and in order for us to kind of scale things, we've always kind of simplified things, and in doing so, we've kind of pulled the life out of things, and many of today's current opportunities, and also many of today's problems are kind of a reaction to this monoculturization. So my idea for the investment firm is to do things that reverse that monoculturization in order to, number one, make worthy investments, and number two, to do investments that can kind of have a positive impact on things.
So what are some examples of the current reductionist or monoculture that you want to change? And what's an example of a system that you think would be amenable to this?
Yeah. So, for example, if you think about the microbiome in the human digestive system, it's an extremely important. It's almost like an organ. There are more cells there than there are in the human body, of microbes, of bacteria, viruses, fungi, etc. And a lot of health issues today are actually currently being directed back and seen to be a cause of the lack of a diversity of organisms in our digestive system, because they serve very real functions in terms of generating neurochemicals and providing immune functions, et cetera. And so one of the first investments I made is in a microbiome company who was doing this treatment. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's kind of an icky thing to talk about, but it's called fecal therapy. And essentially they take the biome, or the poop, of a healthy person and put it inside of an unhealthy person that might be suffering from autoimmune disorders, from skin issues, from digestive issues, etc. And it turns out to be a very, very powerful therapy. And it's already saving many lives, for a very specific type of infection in the United States called C. difficile. And that's it's the only thing it's FDA approved for currently. But it's showing promise for autism, for example. Arizona State University recently released a study 2 years after they've done essentially a single set of transplants and people with autism, and found a pretty significant reversal of symptoms. There's connections now being shown of the microbiome to bipolar, to schizophrenia, to autoimmune disorders, all these other things. So I see it as a very powerful tool. So I've invested in a company in Asia called Asia Microbiome, and they have a little more leeway to test things out there. The treatment is it's actually very safe if the donors are very well tested, and so what they're trying to do is trying to connect all the information about what microbes cause what diseases and what microbes might remediate certain diseases.
Well, just increasing the diversity of the given microbiome for the sake of diversity, I don't know if that's really going to help the person. I mean, it's I would guess it's more identifying what microbes are responsible for what conditions, and what the imbalance is, and then what the redundancies are of the microbes that do help with a given condition, and then looking for that specifically and maybe getting that back into the person. But just diversity for diversity's sake, who knows what the outcome of that would be.
Yeah, I mean, for C. difficile, for example, something that 29,000 people die of every year. and we don't know how to outcompete C. difficile, this bacteria that is inside of people, and actually killing them. And right now, the only treatment that actually works is this throwing diversity at it. So doing a fecal transplant and reversing and outcompeting the C. difficile. And it works in a very high percentage of the time, like 70 or 80% of the time on the first treatment. And if not on the first treatment, the second treatment works. And so this is like an overnight treatment. So I do think it's the diversity versus lack of diversity that is at play there. And there's still a lot we don't know about how the microbiome works. And this is what the company, if we can get more targeted about what we're doing, I think that would be great. But in the interim, we don't know how to put bacteria into somebody that might outcompete like a single bacteria, multiple bacteria, in a way that stays. Probiotics don't stay in our body. They kind of pass through, they serve some function, and then they disappear. So the ecosystem approach seems to be working so far. And there's a huge DIY movement as well with this. Thousands of people are doing this on their own, which is not advisable, but it's something that works so well, and the word is getting around that it's a powerful intervention for many different disorders, especially IBS and other digestive disorders and autoimmune stuff.
People are doing it on their own. What they're asking someone they know, hey, could you help me out? And they'll do like their own fecal transplant on their own.
Yep, they're literally doing it. Yep, exactly. So there's a website called Power of Poop, and then also a bunch of Facebook groups where people share stories and tips, etc., on how to do it. But yeah, the conventional method is, I don't know if you can call it conventional at all, but they take a family member, they have them well tested. There's a series of tests for 100 different types of microbes that might be a problem. And then if their family members test out fine, then they go ahead and they do it on their own, literally in a blender and, with at-home tools and so forth.
So what have you found are some of the important factors, for instance, in doing a fecal transplant? Like what kind of testing needs to be done to make sure the donor is, viable or not? And, what are some of the things that make it work better than not?
Donor sourcing is a huge issue. In terms of, people are looking for, to remedy all sorts of issues, but getting a high quality donor, somebody who has never had antibiotics, somebody who really never gets sick, somebody who doesn't have any type of psychiatric disorders, somebody who's not obese, etc. So there are a lot of factors that go into it. Unfortunately, it's difficult for somebody who's running into problems, and if they're not approved, if they're not ready to be, or they're not addressing a symptom that is approved by the FDA, they kind of have to do it on their own. I guess it's the overall quality of the individual and the health of the person. Ideal, I think, would be Olympic level athletes who have never taken antibiotics and haven't had any issues, et cetera. And then the testing is, it's pretty standard stool testing. You send it in. There's 100 different types of microbes and viruses, et cetera, that would be tested for, everything from HIV to herpes to all sorts of other bacteria and viruses.
When you talk about the microbiome, are you just looking at the microbiome of the colon? Because from what I've been seeing and reading, there's microbiome of the skin and the eye, and it's microbiomes on pretty much every organ and every area of the body. So, when you talk about integration, is there any consideration you see from anyone out there on the integration of various microbiomes in a person, for instance?
Yeah, no, I haven't. So it's definitely just the colon right now. That's the only kind of treatment that's being done. There's a group out of Australia that they're studying the nasal microbiome for people who have chronic sinus infection. And so what they're doing is they're doing exact same thing as the fecal transplant. They're doing a transplant of the sinus microbiome from one person to another. So again, kind of disgusting, but literally taking snot from a healthy person and putting it in an unhealthy person. And so early studies show that that's a pretty powerful tool, but their data is not in yet. And so I think it's another few months before they'll start bringing their data back. But yes, eye microbiome. I know I just read about this today, actually. Some study where this group is hoping to reduce the number of eye infections and so forth by understanding more about the eye microbiome, which is something that I didn't realize we actually had or was actually discussed yet. But yeah, the skin is another one. So there are definitely many different microbiomes on our bodies that are actually important and serve lots of functions, etc.
Very interesting. Is there a joke that they beat the snot out of somebody and then they transfer it into someone else?
Oh yeah, there you go. Forced retrieval of transplant.
Microbiome.
Yeah.
What other companies are you looking at, or areas of of biotech companies? What else interests you in addition to the microbiome?
Yeah, so I'm very interested in mental health. I've had family that have suffered mental health and depression, addiction, etc. And so I'm looking for ways to get involved in that. And I've invested in one company in that realm. And what they're doing is using psilocybin, the ingredient magic mushrooms, or the compound of magic mushroom, to address treatment-resistant depression. So this is depression that folks have had for 20 years, tried every SSRI out there, and are still having trouble. And what happens is they go in for a dose of, essentially they go in for a therapy plus a dose, etc., into a clinical environment in which the therapists have also been trained and have gone through a trip as well. And they'll sit down there for 6 hours and with their therapist and go through this trip treatment. And so I invested in a company that's doing that. The data about psilocybin and depression still preliminary. I think before this company started, there were studies of about 20 or 30 people at a time, which looked very promising. A very high percentage of which went into remission, depression remission, after up to 6 months out. But this particular company is doing a clinical trial of 400 people between UK and Europe, and they got breakthrough status from the FDA to do this work, and so this is stuff that's underway right now in hospitals and clinics throughout the United States and Europe. And the reason why I see depression as just one of those, psychedelics in general are showing a lot of promise for addiction, believe it or not, opioid addiction, tobacco, alcohol, etc. So it's a really interesting field to me, and something I hope to continue to be involved in.
So people that have chronic depression, some of them are ingesting mushrooms, and that seems to alleviate their depression for a period of time.
Yes, exactly. And so a single treatment up to 6 months. 6 months with a pretty high percentage of the people involved. I think it was like 70 or 80%.
Wow. And where is this overseas or in the U.S., or where can these treatments be had?
So this treatment is happening through universities in the U.S. It's primarily in the UK. The company's out of the UK, but they're UK, Sweden, Germany, Portugal, and the United States.
Any other? Yeah, I know depression is huge. Any other types of interventions that you've heard about, other therapies, or is this one appear to be the best so far?
I know for depression there's like a ketamine-related nose spray. I know MDMA is being studied for PTSD. There's a really interesting, I don't know if you've heard of MAPS. It's a nonprofit that kind of funds and promotes a lot of this research. But they have a lot of, if you go to their website, maps.org, they have a lot of the research listed there. I guess the main thing is addiction and depression and PTSD, which psychedelics are showing a lot of promise for.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, at what point do you think, going back to the fecal transplant stuff, and then even to this, the depression therapy, how close are these to becoming more mainstream and widely available? Probably forget about insurance, but at least available, for the public.
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess if this trial goes well in the next year or two, I could see within a few years starting to see psilocybin have kind of medical uses, so being approved for medical uses. I'm not really clear on kind of the timeline or what happens once the study's finished and they start to, I guess we start to get government to consider in a similar way that we have with medical marijuana. A lot of people are saying that this path for psilocybin is very similar to the one that medical marijuana went on. So we'll see. Yeah. And then in terms of the fecal therapy, it's really interesting because, typically FDA approves a single molecule for a single disorder. And so this idea that, you're putting thousands of different species of bacteria into somebody it kind of doesn't even fit into the model that we use for approving therapies and drugs. So I'm not clear on how it will get past, will continue to get past the FDA and so forth. At least we know that there are other jurisdictions where it will be happening, so long as it's safe as it seems to be.
Interesting. So what do you have your feelers out for? What are some of the basic qualifications of companies that you're looking at?
Yeah,
should they want to apply?
Just for example, another one I'm looking at and actually probably will invest in this week or next week is called Regen Network, and essentially they're using the blockchain to facilitate the logistics of doing regenerative agriculture, so crowdfunding regenerative agriculture and so forth, and using sensors, satellite information, and so forth to verify that this particular cornfield has been transformed into a kind of a food forest or agroforestry where there are 20 different species and so forth. So there's data that NASA releases that can allow you to kind of just do that automatically and test. And so this company's taking a blockchain and using it for that purpose. So that's an example of another one that I'm looking at. I would say, any companies that are kind of in this realm and doing stuff, I guess you could consider it progressive. I think of, I specifically am thinking of diversity related for everything. This idea that diversity is the missing thing and replacing it is a thing that kind of fixes issues and makes these investments good and these innovations good. But I'm open to other stuff as well. And if folks are interested, they can just go to my website, supersystemic.ly, and get some information over to me.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, I appreciate you coming on the podcast and the stuff that you're looking to invest in, and it's all super interesting. So
cool.
I definitely appreciate you coming. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
You're listening to the Future Tech Health Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Until I reached age 40, I never realized the obvious, that we all have medical issues, or we at least have a family member or close relation that has, or will have them in the future. Medicine and biological systems are the final frontier. Until we've conquered death, figured out how life began, cured cancer, and understood our purpose in the universe, there's a heck of a lot to talk about when it comes to our health. Future Tech Health means I'll be covering futuristic topics that are actually already in clinical trials, or even starting to appear on shelves or by prescription, or available for your own use. We dive deep into stem cells, CRISPR-Cas9, the science of sleep, epigenetics, medical testing, cancer, ketogenic diets, stem cells, aging, regenerative medicine, and more. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a serious medical problem. Remember, however, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and share it with friends. Thank you.